So that was the context, and now I'm gonna give just a recap and summary of all the symptoms in a list. Hey y'all, it's Morgan and welcome to the video. Today I want to talk about all of the symptoms that led me to an endometriosis specialist and thus my hysterectomy, which I had about 8 months ago, and I have a playlist all about it, the surgery, the pathology results, how recovery is going. I will link that down below if you want to check that out later. But I have yet to do a video about all of the symptoms that I was having leading up to that. So in this video, I'm going to break down my issues along a timeline and give some context the best I can, but my symptoms weren't always obvious, especially in the beginning, and I wasn't really tracking them until things got really bad. It took me a while to connect the dots that endometriosis or adenomyosis might be causing my issues, but I'm gonna go the best I can off my memory and give some insight into what led me to that endometriosis specialist appointment. And just a disclaimer, I'm not a medical professional. I am just speaking from my own personal experience, and each person's experience with these diseases and conditions will vary, so this is just what I experienced. Okay, so let's start with some background and the broad issues. So I'm currently 27. I had my hysterectomy at 26. I've had debilitating symptoms since I was 24. And I've had annoying issues that were painful, but like they weren't super disruptive to my life since my early 20s and late teenage years probably. But you know, like I wasn't really tracking then. If I had issues then, I just kind of associated them with other things. And throughout this time, up until my hysterectomy, I had an IUD, so I did not have predictable periods. I just had very occasional spotting, so I wasn't tracking menstrual cycles or anything like that. And for as long as I can remember, like in middle school, high school, I've always had stomach problems, different issues with foods, bloating, inconsistency, like IBS symptoms type stuff, and that also continued in college, and I never knew what foods were gonna do it, and it was kind of inconsistent, like one food could be safe one time and then maybe another time it wasn't. But basically through my early 20s, I was having probably typical issues that would be just written off as women's problems and that are normal. But throughout this time, I didn't really have a lot of cramping. Like that wasn't something that was a big issue for me. Then when I was 22 and I had my first job after college, which was in a corn research lab, but it was really just me in a cornfield a lot doing physical labor, I noticed that I had a lot of back pain, but I just kind of wrote that off as I was doing a lot of physical work and being on my feet a lot, and I was also tired a lot, but again, I just assumed that was from work. And like I remember talking to my coworker at the time about like the stomach issues and bloating I was having, because it was getting really bad at this point. And like almost every time after I would eat lunch, like I would just be so painful for the rest of the day and I couldn't focus on anything, like it just hurt so bad. And then when I was 23, I started medication for anxiety, and that year at some point or around that time, I also started having nausea and vomiting. I don't know, maybe once or twice a month. Like it wasn't all the time. And then my job, which was a year long, once it was over, I was able to not work for a little bit. So I was working out and I was in pretty good health, and that was also the year I got married. So everything was good. Nothing seemed particularly off. I was still having back pain, but I just wrote it off as the bed being bad or me sleeping wrong or something, but like I was kind of having a lot of back pain, I think, even at that time from what I can remember. But that year was 2019, and from what I remember, like that was a pretty good year. There was nothing super wrong. I think maybe later in the year I maybe had some more issues. And then in 2020, when I was 24, my issues became more obvious. Just before everything shut down, like it was in March 2020, my husband and I were looking at apartments where we were going to move for his job when he graduated. And I did find I was able to walk around throughout the city and eat and do normal things, like just fine. And then the next day when we went to look at apartments, I got sick twice, like threw up. And then like 2 days later, the world shut down, and it seems like everything really escalated from there, my pain increased a lot, like my back pain, like everything just hurt a lot. But I was still working out. My husband and I were working out at home by ourselves, and we were still pretty physical, and I don't remember having too many food issues at the time. I think I might have started having trouble eating around this time, but it's kind of hard to remember because everything was chaotic at that time with the world, and yeah, I was just not keeping track of that stuff. But then we moved in June 2020, and I never physically recovered from that. At our new place, I found it difficult to work out at the level that I had just been working out at, and even going on walks was exhausting, and I would need a nap, so I stopped going on walks, and I kept doing yoga until I pretty much physically couldn't do it anymore because I just got too weak. The nausea and vomiting were becoming a regular occurrence, and along with food aversions, and yeah, I was starting to lose weight and just getting weak at this point, and I stopped being able to do basic things like keeping up with the cleaning around our apartment. Like, that would just like absolutely wipe me out and cause me a lot of pain. And at some point so far while I've been talking, you might have thought, did you ever think you might be pregnant? I was not pregnant, and I was having these issues that very much felt like I could be pregnant. I started to realize that my symptoms would get worse on a cyclical basis. Like, I would have a really, really bad week, then I'd have a few weeks where it wouldn't be so bad, and I'd be like, okay, I'm all good again, and then bang, it'd come again. So I started kind of associating it with my menstrual cycle, even though I wasn't having a period to like track that with. I was like, I guess that's what's happening. But eventually the time between the pain increases became less and less until the pain and symptoms were just like all the time. And at some point I started getting a very intense pulling sensation when I would have bowel movements, and it made me terrified of using the bathroom because I would get tunnel vision and sweat and feel like I was going to pass out. And I have a pretty high pain tolerance, so it was bad. And I was having pain and tightness and stiffness in my left pelvic region, it felt like, and like I just couldn't move my body. Like, I was just like stiff, and also getting intimate would cause pain. And so like there was just pain, a lot of pain in various ways. And I was also in pain from losing weight. Like, my bones just hurt and my muscles hurt from that. And I was like I was barely eating. And so I was not getting enough to sustain myself, let alone do anything extra. So it was probably about early 2021 when I realized that endometriosis and or adenomyosis might be causing me issues based on my symptoms and research and family history. And I even had an aunt that had a hysterectomy when she was in her 30s because of endometriosis. But I was waiting to see a doctor until we moved, again because I didn't want to have to find another doctor. And also at this time, people still were not going to doctors unless you were like dying. So we moved again in June 2021, and by this time I hated leaving the house, and I was housebound, and not just because of the pandemic. I would just puke anytime I left, and yeah, it was absolutely miserable. And the move happened in 2 phases because the house we were moving into wasn't ready till September, and our lease was up in June. So I pretty much spent a couple months on my parents' couch with my heating pad, doing nothing and being miserable. And moving this time took more out of me than I had, where I pretty much did not get up unless it was to get sick. And I was just kind of withering away, and I was extremely bloated, like a lot, and I couldn't use my abs like at all, so my back would try to compensate for that, and so I was having even more back pain. And I started having this excruciating like rib pain. So sitting and standing were especially painful, and yeah, there was just, you know, lots of pain happening. And I was just trying really hard to not hurt myself before we moved actually into our house, because I knew that was gonna be a lot. So I, tried to be easy on myself. And then phase 2 of moving happened and it caused a very big flare for me. I made a video about it that you can check out. It's got phases 1 and 2 of moving and includes all of the lead up to the flare, but it's kind of a long story, so I'm not going to include it all here, but it's the closest I've ever come to going to the ER, and yeah, it was very bad. So once I was recovered from my flare, which took a bit to get my wits back about me, I made a couple of appointments, one to a regular gynecologist and one to a endometriosis specialist. And I saw the regular gynecologist in October of 2021, and she wasn't terribly concerned about my issues despite the pain I was having and that I'd lost 40 pounds from not eating at this point. But then she touched my cervix and there was some pain, so she decided to go ahead and order the transvaginal ultrasound, and it came back clear, which was good enough for her to just send me back on my way and come back in another year. And I was like, I literally just puked this morning and I'm in so much pain right now. What? But I had that endometriosis specialist appointment scheduled that I was holding on to, and it was still a few months away. But I did my research and I knew that it was unlikely that a regular doctor, even a gynecologist, was going to find endometriosis or adenomyosis because they don't really show up on scans very easily. Scans usually come back clear for them, and they're invisible illnesses, and they will oftentimes overlook them because they don't fully understand them. So that's why I really wanted to see a specialist to confirm or deny what I thought was going on. But from what I read on forums, like, it takes people a long time to reach a diagnosis because of how hard it is to find and how few people understand it and how dismissive the medical system is in general of women's pain. I just wanted to go ahead and skip all of the testing to make sure it's not this or that or whatever. Like, I wanted to go to the specialist because just based on everything that I read and from my experiences and other people's experiences, like, I was pretty sure endometriosis, adenomyosis was going to be a factor in what was happening to me. Really only the specialists for this understand the intricacies of how it affects like the whole body and stuff. So I was disheartened by my first appointment, but not necessarily surprised, which is why I had already made the next appointment before I even saw her, because I was like, I need a specialist. So I had a bit more hope for my specialist appointment that they would at least listen to me and understand what I was talking about, and I wouldn't have to necessarily try to prove what was happening. So I was just kind of biding my time for the next few months, trying to not cause a flare, waiting till this appointment. And the week of this appointment, I got a phone call from them that my appointment was canceled because there was a rise in COVID and they were canceling appointments because of it. And I was quite heartbroken because I had waited 4 months for this appointment and I was just kind of hanging on to that glimmer of hope, and yeah, it was not a fun time. So I ended up making an appointment with a different specialist, and that was in April of 2022. And the few months in between there were somewhat brutal. Yeah, my condition just continued to get worse, and I was still losing weight, and yeah, it was not great. The pain and the nausea and the vomiting and the weakness and all of it was a lot, and it was pretty constant, and I did not like being left home alone because I was afraid because I just like literally couldn't do anything in case of any type of emergency, no matter how small. Like, I literally could not do anything. But that's also around the time that I started my YouTube channel and started sharing my experiences of what I was going through, because I know I'm not the only one experiencing the things that I'm going through, even though it feels like that sometimes, because like I'm alone most of the time, except for the internet, which makes me feel like I'm never alone. But around March 2022, I made a video about my chronic pain struggles, which you can check out if you want. I hit a rough patch because I was trying really hard to do this channel because like I couldn't do anything else in life. Like, I could not leave the house. And then I was getting upset because I just couldn't do anything. So anyways, the specialist that I saw in April agreed that endometriosis and or adenomyosis could be causing my issues, and she gave me some options, which included doing a diagnostic and excision surgery for endometriosis, or I could do that plus a hysterectomy, which if adenomyosis was causing me problems, then my best chance at having relief was to have a hysterectomy, and I didn't want kids, so I was like, yes, please, that option, because I literally cannot leave the house. I have no life. I can't do anything. I want the best chances of getting better. So I chose the hysterectomy and had that in July of 2022. And I've been documenting the experience and recovery in my hysterectomy series playlist, which I mentioned earlier. So, I'll link that below and at the end of the video if you want to check it out. So I did end up having adenomyosis, which is very similar to endometriosis, but it's inside the uterus, not outside of it. I might do a video at some point distinguishing the two, but they're very similar. I have a whole video on the pathology results of my surgery, and I also go into detail about what exactly my surgery entailed and all that. So if you want to see that, it's in the hysterectomy playlist. Alright, so that is pretty much the story version of the symptoms and how they appeared and kind of what happened. And I think it's important to give the symptoms context and a timeline, because just like Googling and seeing like a list of symptoms is like, what does that look like? Or like, what could that look like? So yeah, so that was the context. And now I'm gonna give just a recap and summary of all the symptoms in a list. That way you have that now too. I have the list here, so I'm gonna look at it and read it off. So I had nausea, vomiting, weight loss. By the time I had surgery, I had lost 50 pounds, 50, and I had back pain, mostly lower back, but also mid back, and it just kind of radiated, and a lot of stiffness in my back and couldn't move very well. I had cervical pain, pelvic pain, and tightness, especially in my left side, IBS and gastrointestinal issues, bloating, and severe painful bloating eventually. And then I had pulling sensations with bowel movements and a lot of fatigue and weakness. So I think that covers everything, but if you have any questions or something wasn't clear, be sure to comment down below and I will try to clarify for you. And I hope you found this video helpful, especially if you find yourself in a similar situation. I'm almost 8 months post-op from my hysterectomy, and I've been making a lot of progress, and hopefully my worst days are behind me. But yeah, if you want to know more about all of that, I will pop up the playlist on the screen for you to check out and link it down below. And if you want to see more videos like this, be sure to subscribe. Alright, that is all for today. Thank you so much for spending this time with me, and I will see you again soon. Bye!